Right, we're about to cover over 500 years of history in just the next few minutes. So buckle up, we're going to explore the epic story of how a nation was forged, how it was tested, and how it ultimately rose to become a global power.
So, how does that even happen? How do you go from a revolutionary spark to the dominant force of the 20th century? Well, that journey is just packed with conflict, innovation, and these huge defining moments. We're going to explore the key turning points that shaped the United States, starting long before it even had a name.
You see, the story of America, it doesn't really begin with Columbus. It actually begins with the incredibly diverse societies that thrived here for centuries, long before any European ships ever showed up on the horizon. Just look at the sheer scale of time here. We're talking thousands and thousands of years. Before any European ships arrived, this continent was this incredible tapestry of complex cultures, from major city builders to advanced democracies like the Iroquois Confederacy. Make no mistake, this was already a populated and very sophisticated world. So when Europeans arrive in 1492, it introduces this fundamental conflict. And it wasn't just about territory, it was a total clash of worldviews. On one hand, you have a view of land as a communal resource, something to be lived in harmony with. And on the other, you have this idea of land as a commodity, something to be owned, divided up, and used for profit. This basic disagreement right here would go on to define centuries of conflict. This number, it's just staggering. It represents the devastating and kind of unseen impact of that collision. While there were definitely wars, the single most lethal factor for native populations was disease. It's estimated that up to 90% of the indigenous people were wiped out by foreign illnesses that they'd never encountered before and had absolutely no immunity to.
Okay, next up, let's see how these growing tensions between the British Crown and its 13 colonies just ignited a revolution. We're going to see how colonists became revolutionaries and how an American identity was about to be forged in the crucible of war.
The path to war was really like a rapid domino effect. Britain, deep in debt from other wars, imposes new taxes. The colonists, of course, protest. Britain then retaliates with these really punitive laws. The colonists called them the Intolerable Acts, which basically stripped away local control. Well, that crackdown was the final push that sent the colonies over the edge toward a full-blown war for independence. This simple phrase became this incredibly powerful rallying cry. And it's so important to understand this wasn't just about money. For the colonists, this was about a fundamental right, the right to have a say in their own government, which they felt a parliament thousands of miles away was just completely ignoring. Let's be clear, an American victory was far from a sure thing. The Continental Army was up against the most powerful military in the world at the time. The real turning point came at the Battle of Saratoga. That victory was what convinced France, and then later Spain, to openly join the American cause. That international help was absolutely critical to forcing the final British surrender. So, winning the war, that was one thing, but building a nation from scratch? That's a whole other challenge. The newly independent states came up with this radical new blueprint for a government, the Constitution. And along with the Bill of Rights, it established a system of shared powers and guaranteed liberties that really laid the foundation for the entire nation.
Now, this new nation, it began to grow at an absolutely explosive rate, pushing its borders farther and farther west. But this expansion, it came at a tremendous cost, and it exposed a deep, fatal flaw right at the heart of the American experiment.
This idea was called manifest destiny. It was this belief that the US was somehow divinely ordained to stretch all the way across the continent. Now, this concept was used to justify acquiring huge territories, but it also led to the brutal, forced removal of Native Americans from their ancestral lands, culminating in absolute tragedies like the Trail of Tears. And this slide, man, it just lays out the core of the conflict. It was totally irreconcilable. This went way beyond economics. It was about two competing definitions of what liberty even meant. The North's vision was based on free labor, while the South's was completely intertwined with the right to own property, and that included owning other human beings. As the nation expanded, these two visions were just on a fatal collision course. The Civil War was the bloodiest conflict in American history, period. It did preserve the Union, and it finally led to the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery. But the nation paid an immense price. And then, just days after the Confederate surrender, it lost the very leader who had guided it through its darkest hour.
In the wake of the Civil War, the United States started to heal. It industrialized and it grew at this incredible pace. And it was during this period that the nation really and rapidly ascended to become a dominant force on the world stage.
This timeline here shows the key steps. Through a series of global conflicts, the U.S. really transformed itself into a superpower. The Spanish-American War made it a colonial power. Its entry into 2 world wars cemented its military might. And of course, the moon landing? That was the ultimate demonstration of its technological supremacy.
After World War II, with so much of Europe just in ruins, the U.S. didn't pull back. Instead, it invested billions of dollars through what was called the Marshall Plan to rebuild its allies and even its former enemies. This was this incredible act of strategic generosity that not only helped stop the spread of communism, but also cemented America's role as the leader of the Western world.
The world that came after the war was really defined by this ideological battle for the future. The Cold War pitted the U.S. against the Soviet Union in this global contest for influence. And it wasn't fought on traditional battlefields, but through things like proxy wars, an unprecedented arms race, and the crazy technological competition of the space race. But the 20th century also turned a lens inward, forcing the nation to confront the huge gap between its promises and its reality, all while it was facing new, completely unforeseen threats from abroad. A full century after the abolition of slavery, the fight for equality was still far from over. The civil rights movement, led by iconic figures like Martin Luther King Jr., used nonviolent protests to challenge segregation and demand that the country finally live up to its own founding promise of liberty and justice for all its citizens. This date, it marked such a shocking and abrupt turning point. The attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon ushered in a totally new era of conflict, what became known as the War on Terror. And it fundamentally reshaped American foreign policy, national security, and even daily life in ways that we still feel today. So where does that leave us today? Well, the United States is still a leading world power. No doubt. It's defined by its immense economic and military strength and its leadership in science and technology. But it's also a nation that's continually grappling with its very complex history and the ongoing work of trying to reconcile its founding ideals with all of these modern social challenges. And really, that's the ultimate takeaway here. History isn't just some collection of dates and events you study in a book. It's a dynamic, unfolding story. The decisions being made right now are writing the next chapter of this complex and powerful nation. The real question is, what is that chapter going to look like?